No one noticed it at first, because legends don't vanish in a single moment. They don't announce their exit or explain themselves. They fade quietly, slipping through the cracks between headlines, between tours, between expectations no one questions until it's too late. One day, he was everywhere. His name on posters, his voice on the radio, his words quoted by people who felt seen because of him. At just 29, he had what most artists spend their entire lives chasing: sold-out venues, critics calling him a voice of a generation, songs that didn't just play, but stayed. And then, nothing. No press release, no farewell performance, no reason given. Fans waited, assuming it was temporary. Weeks passed. Weeks became months. Months stretched into years. The silence grew heavier with every unanswered question. In that vacuum, rumors rushed in to take control of the story. Some said drugs had finally caught up with him. Others whispered about a breakdown, a mind collapsing under pressure. A few insisted he'd simply lost whatever magic once made him special. But the truth wasn't dramatic in the way people expected. It wasn't explosive. It was quieter, more human, more painful. Behind the mythology, behind the awards and carefully crafted interviews, there was one story he refused to tell. One name he never said out loud. A relationship that shaped his greatest work. A departure that cracked something deep inside him. And a decision that forced him to step away from the very thing he loved most. For decades, whenever the question came up, he deflected. He smiled, he joked, he changed the subject. But time has a way of softening defenses. And near the end of his life, he finally admitted what had been hiding in plain sight all along. This isn't the story people think they know. It's the story behind the silence. Before the stages, before the interviews, before his name carried weight, he was just a quiet kid trying to disappear into sound. He grew up in a place people leave, not arrive. A town shaped by cold streets, long winters, and an almost permanent sense of isolation. Silence filled the air there, broken only by routine and resignation. For him, music wasn't a dream or a career plan. It was escape, a way out of a life that already felt too small. He never learned music the right way. He didn't read notes, he didn't study theory. Rules bored him. Instead, he listened closely. He copied what he heard. Then he bent it, twisted it, and turned it into something unfamiliar. His chords felt wrong, but they worked. Teachers didn't know what to make of him. Neither did his classmates. He didn't fit anywhere, and he felt it deeply. Early on, he learned that being ordinary felt like suffocation, so he started reinventing himself. First small things, exaggerations, half-truths, then bigger ones, new names, new stories, even new memories. Truth became flexible. Identity became something you could put on and take off. Performance didn't stop at the stage, it became a way of living. By the time he finally left home, he wasn't chasing fame or recognition. He was running, away from who he'd been, from a past that felt like a trap. That instinct to shed skin after skin never left him. It followed him through every chapter of his life. Because long before the world tried to define him, he learned how to disappear inside his own mythology. And somehow, it worked. She wasn't impressed by the stories he told or the image he carefully projected. She didn't care about the persona he wore in interviews or the growing attention that followed him everywhere. She never chased the spotlight, and she never treated his talent like a prize to be won. That was exactly why he noticed her. In a world full of people trying to get closer to his rising fame, she stood still and looked straight through it. She challenged him without raising her voice, not with arguments or ultimatums, but simply by seeing him as he was when the act fell away. She read the same books he did, then asked questions he didn't want to answer. She questioned what he believed, why he believed it, and who benefited from his silence. She pushed him toward ideas that made him uncomfortable: politics, poetry, responsibility. Not as slogans, but as obligations. For the first time, music stopped being just a personal release. It became direction. His songs sharpened, the anger became focused, the confusion turned into purpose. Lyrics that once floated, now cut. People heard the change immediately. Critics called it brilliance. Fans called it truth. They said he had found his voice. What they didn't see was the pressure building behind closed doors. Fame accelerated everything. Success magnified every crack. The more the world reached for him, the more distant he became from the person who had helped him find meaning in the first place. Schedules replaced conversations. Crowds replaced intimacy. When she finally walked away, it wasn't just the end of a relationship. She took with her the version of himself that still believed meaning mattered. And without that anchor, something inside him never fully recovered.
Heartbreak didn't slow him down, it hardened him. Confusion turned into rebellion, and rebellion became reinvention. Instead of retreating, he leaned into change with intention. He shocked his audience on purpose. He changed his sound. He changed his image. He rejected the expectations people had wrapped around him and set fire to the version of himself they thought they owned. Some applauded the transformation, calling it bold and fearless. Others felt betrayed, as if he had broken an unspoken contract. But outrage never bothered him. What terrified him was indifference. Silence from the crowd was far worse than anger. As long as people reacted, he knew he still existed. Each transformation pushed him further away from the version fans loved and closer to the chaos growing inside him. Touring stopped feeling like celebration and started feeling like survival. Nights blurred together in unfamiliar rooms. Days disappeared in transit, interviews and performances that demanded everything and returned very little. He was praised and attacked in equal measure, called a prophet one year, a fraud the next. Critics tried to define him. Fans argued over who he used to be. Everyone wanted an explanation. But somewhere in the middle of the noise, he lost control of the narrative he had spent years constructing. The mythology no longer protected him. It trapped him. And with every reinvention, he ran further from the questions he didn't want to answer about love, loss, and the part of himself he had left behind. The world saw evolution. What they missed was fracture. The incident came without warning, and even now the details remain blurred. It was sudden, unclear, still debated years later. One moment he was everywhere, on stages, on covers, in conversations that defined an era. The next, he was gone. Not gradually, completely. There were no photographs to study, no official statements to analyze, no urgency from his side to explain what had happened. The absence itself became the headline. People filled the silence the only way they knew how. Some assumed tragedy, others suspected collapse. A few believed it was another carefully planned act. But what followed didn't look like disaster or drama. It looked quiet, domestic, ordinary, almost peaceful. Instead of hospitals and press conferences, there were kitchens, backyards, and routines that had nothing to do with applause. What confused people most was the choice. He could have spoken. He could have shaped the story. He chose not to. In a world where access was expected and explanations were demanded, he opted for absence. No interviews, no updates, no reassurance. It wasn't retreat out of fear. It was retreat as refusal. For the first time in his career, the world couldn't reach him. The phones rang unanswered. Questions piled up with nowhere to land. And as months turned into years, it became clear that this wasn't a pause. It was a stop. Not an ending, a withdrawal. The moment everything froze wasn't marked by sound or spectacle. It was marked by silence. And silence, in his case, spoke louder than anything he'd ever written. While fans argued and speculated from a distance, he was quietly rebuilding himself behind closed doors. Not the myth, not the icon, the man. His world shrank on purpose. Family replaced crowds. Routine replaced chaos. Silence replaced noise. The same person who once seemed to thrive on attention now avoided it completely, as if too much of it had nearly erased him. Days began to look ordinary. Meals at the same table, walks without an audience, conversations that didn't need to go anywhere. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't productive in industry standards, but it was grounding. For the first time in years, he wasn't reacting to the world, he was living inside it. Music didn't stop, it softened. The urgency drained out of it, the anger settled. Fame didn't vanish either, it waited patiently, lingering in the background like a shadow that no longer dictated his every move. He was still writing, still searching, still wrestling with meaning, but now the process belonged to him alone. There were no deadlines, no expectations to fulfill. Songs didn't need to explain anything. They didn't need to prove relevance. They simply existed. And in that privacy, he found something he hadn't had in a long time: control. Not over the narrative, but over his own pace. What the world saw as disappearance was in reality reconstruction, a quiet decision to choose presence over performance. The spotlight dimmed, and in its absence, he learned how to breathe again. When he finally returned, anticipation turned into projection. People expected fire. They expected confrontation. They expected either an apology or a grand statement explaining the years of silence. What they got instead was restraint. A calmer voice, softer edges, fewer answers. The shift was immediate, and for many, disappointing. Critics didn't know what to do with him anymore. The urgency was gone. The rebellion had cooled. Fans were split between relief and confusion. Some praised the maturity. Others felt disconnected, as if the person they once followed had quietly slipped away for good. But confusion was never an accident. It was the point. He wasn't trying to reclaim anything. He wasn't interested in returning to who he used to be. Once again, he was shedding skin, letting old expectations fall away, refusing to explain the transformation in terms people could easily digest. He didn't chase relevance. He didn't defend his choices. What mattered was that he was still moving, just in a direction few recognized. The performance had changed because the person had changed, and the distance between who he was and who people wanted him to be had never been wider. The return wasn't a comeback. It was a reminder that evolution doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't wait for understanding. This time, the shift had nothing to do with sound or style. It wasn't musical, it was spiritual. Almost overnight, irony gave way to belief. Ambiguity disappeared, replaced by certainty. The man who once asked questions for a living now spoke as if he had found answers, and for an audience raised on doubt, that change was unsettling. The reaction was immediate. Concert halls thinned out. Listeners who had followed him through every reinvention suddenly felt excluded. Some walked out mid-performance, unable or unwilling to recognize the person on stage. Friends grew distant, unsure how to connect with someone who now spoke a different language altogether. The world that once celebrated his contradictions didn't know what to do with conviction. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften the message. Instead, he doubled down. Performances turned into declarations. Songs became testimony. He spoke openly about faith, redemption, and an approaching reckoning. For many, it felt like betrayal, not of music, but of the shared uncertainty that had once connected them. Critics were harsh. Fans were divided. Invitations stopped coming. Doors quietly closed. But alienation didn't scare him anymore. He had already survived disappearance. Compared to that, rejection felt manageable. For the first time in his career, the world couldn't reach him. The phones rang unanswered. Questions piled up with nowhere to land. And as months turned into years, it became clear that this wasn't a pause. It was a stop. Not an ending, a withdrawal. The moment everything froze wasn't marked by sound or spectacle. It was marked by silence. And silence, in his case, spoke louder than anything he'd ever written. While fans argued and speculated from a distance, he was quietly rebuilding himself behind closed doors. Not the myth, not the icon, the man. His world shrank on purpose. Family replaced crowds. Routine replaced chaos. Silence replaced noise. The same person who once seemed to thrive on attention now avoided it completely, as if too much of it had nearly erased him. Days began to look ordinary. Meals at the same table. Walks without an audience. Conversations that didn't need to go anywhere. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't productive in industry standards, but it was grounding. For the first time in years, he wasn't reacting to the world. He was living inside it. Music didn't stop. It softened. The urgency drained out of it. The anger settled. Fame didn't vanish either. It waited patiently, lingering in the background like a shadow that no longer dictated his every move. He was still writing, still searching, still wrestling with meaning, but now the process belonged to him alone. There were no deadlines, no expectations to fulfill. Songs didn't need to explain anything. They didn't need to prove relevance. They simply existed. And in that privacy, he found something he hadn't had in a long time: control. Not over the narrative, but over his own pace. What the world saw as disappearance was in reality reconstruction, a quiet decision to choose presence over performance. The spotlight dimmed, and in its absence, he learned how to breathe again. When he finally returned, anticipation turned into projection. People expected fire. They expected confrontation. They expected either an apology or a grand statement explaining